Hey there, scary people, and welcome back to the One Scary Woman YouTube channel, where you get to watch me make a feature film from concept to completion this year. So, following along with our process, this month is all about getting those screenplays written. So, if this is something that you're trying to do as well, you got to make sure to have a really amazing screenplay. And you can't have an amazing screenplay unless you understand screenplay structure. So, for better or worse, screenwriting has a whole lot of rules that come along with it that you have to learn if you're going to write a script that's really going to resonate with audiences. So, whether your final goal is to produce it yourself or sell it to another producer, you need to know how to do this. So, I'm going to break this down, make it as easy for you as possible. There are different kinds of screenplay structure that exist. So the one that I'm about to share is not the only one that exists. If it doesn't resonate with you, there are others. You can even put in the comment if you think you would like to hear more about different kinds of screenplay structure. But this one is by far and away the most common. And for me, I think it is the easiest one to use. So every person is different. But for me, I have always found this really, really simple. And this is just the classic 3-act screenplay structure, which comes along with about 8 beats, sometimes 9. Sometimes there's an unofficial one in there that I will talk about. So I'm going to go ahead now and walk you through the 3-act screenplay structure. And before we get officially started with the individual beats, let me just mention, because I think this is a really good way to describe it, I have heard screenplay structure be described as, in the first act, your character gets up a tree. In the second act, people throw rocks at him. And in the third act, he figures out how to get back down. This is a really, really simplified way to look at it. But especially if you're just starting on your screenplay journey, you're just starting to learn about how this works, it's also a really helpful way to look at it. So essentially, in the first act, your character is just going to get themselves into a situation. Most of the second act is just going to be dealing with all the obstacles and different things they have to go through now that they're in the situation. And then in the third act, it is going to have to resolve one way or another. So in their favor or not in their favor, there has to be some sort of resolution. One other thing I will mention before breaking down the points of 3-act structure for you is that the first act is typically about 25% of your total script. So if you look at your page count, the second act is about 50%. And the second act is usually where a lot of people struggle. So we'll talk a little bit about how to handle that. And then the third act, again, is about 25%. So when you're planning your screenplay, just keep in mind that that middle act is going to account for about 50% total of your runtime, of your amount of pages. All right, so let's get going. And I will be using one of my favorite movies to give some examples as I work through this so you can see how it works. Now, the first point of your 3-act structure that you're going to want to get is your sensational opening. Now, with films, so writing other kinds of scripts, the opening might not necessarily have to be as sensational, but usually with films, there's some kind of sensational opening that's going to grab the attention of your audience right off the bat. It's going to set the tone for the film, keep them interested. Now, the movie I'm going to be using for my example movie is my personal favorite, so I use it for most things, and that is Jaws. So Jaws is one of those classic Spielberg films that just adheres really, really well to 3-act structure. And if you've seen it, which most people have, then of course you already know that there is a sensational opening. So it opens with the girl and guy on the beach deciding to go skinny dipping. He passes out drunk. She goes in the water and she winds up being brutally killed. So it's a sensational opening. It sets the tone for the whole rest of the movie. We know that we're going to have to deal with this shark. And one interesting thing to note is it doesn't yet involve our main character. So a lot of times in films, especially scary films, especially thriller, horror, suspense, they start by showing you something that happens to another character. And the reason for this is that when you actually get to know and like your main character, you're going to know exactly how much danger they're in because you saw it in the opening with someone that you weren't really invested in yet, but you did see something terrible happen to them, and that clued you in to let you know exactly what you needed to be afraid of for your main character. So that's your first point that you're going to want to get down. Think of a sensational opening, but one that goes along with the genre that you're working with. The second one is your inciting incident. So the inciting incident is the thing that happens that is going to bring your hero on the journey. So in Jaws, this is when Chief Brody gets the call and has to go out to the beach to investigate that there is this missing girl. And what happens? He finds parts of her body chewed up in the surf. So that's our inciting incident. So from that point on, he is now involved. Initially in the movie, the report says this was a shark attack. So he knows, even though, the mayor and other people are going to try to push it aside, that there is a killer shark. And as the police chief, he has a responsibility to deal with it. So whatever the inciting incident is that you choose, your main character now has to be on the journey for the rest of the film. Now, there is sort of an unofficial third point. So not so much a part of your structure, but it is something that if you are doing your job well, naturally should happen. And that is that by about page 10 of your script, we, the readers or the viewers, the audience, should know what this is about. So rule of thumb, 1 page equals about 1 minute of runtime. So you're about 10 minutes into your film. 10 minutes into Jaws, yes, we know that there is a killer shark, and we know that this police chief, main character that we've met, is going to have to deal with it. So it's clear to us, what the rest of this story is going to be. All right, so for number 4, your number 4 point in your 3-act structure, you're going to, at the end of Act 1, so again, approximately 25% into your script. Imagine that your script is 100 pages. We can make the math easy. So that's at about page 25, give or take. We are going to have plot point number 1. And what plot point number 1 does is it propels us into Act 2. So something happens at plot point 1 that is going to further your story and cause whatever comes next. So whatever's going to happen in Act 2, it's going to cause that to happen. So in Jaws, and there's a couple different moments that lead into each other, but there's a second victim. So in the beginning, we have the victim of the girl. The police chief knows what has happened. The rest of the town doesn't yet. The mayor basically asks him to just say it's not a shark and keep things going, just status quo. But now a second attack happens. So a little boy is killed, and now the entire town knows. Not only do they know, but the grieving mother puts a call out in like Field and Stream magazine, all these other places, so that all these fishermen start coming from all over the country to try and kill this shark. So this is going to propel us into Act 2, where now there's a battle going on in the town. Do you close the beach? Do you not close the beach? There's all these fishermen that come into town. There's this big competition going on to see who can get the shark. So it's driving all that action that's going to follow. Now, the next beat that you want to hit is that you want to have your midpoint. And true to its name, the midpoint should occur exactly in the middle of your script. So if you had a 100-page script, it's happening on about page 50, so right in the middle. And as you get more and more familiar with screenplay structure and you watch some of your favorite movies, pay attention. So exactly how long are those movies? Exactly time-wise, what is the minute where you are at the center of that story? And you will start to notice, you'll start to recognize very quickly that it is pretty much always a midpoint. And how do you define a midpoint? So a midpoint is something that happens in your script that once it happens, everything that comes after it is different in some fundamental way. So up until the midpoint of your script, you've been going along, maybe your character has been trying to do certain things to solve their problem, but then something happens at the midpoint. And again, it shifts everything. So everything from that point on will be different in some fundamental way. Now in Jaws, this moment occurs, and it occurs almost exactly at the center minute of the film when the mayor finally changes his mind and decides to give support to the police chief, to Matt Hooper, the oceanographer, to Quint, the old, sea dog character, decides to finally give them support and finances so that they can go out and kill the shark. So up until this point, the mayor has pretty much been denying that there's even a problem, trying to sweep it under the rug, saying that everything is fine. He can no longer do that, so he now has to openly acknowledge not only is there a problem, but yes, you now have my full support to go out and try to solve this problem. All right, so then that point in the script, now we've got those 3 main characters, Chief Brody being our main character, heading out to sea. And what's going to happen at end of Act 2, this is your next beat, you're going to have plot point 2. So just like plot point 1 wrapped up Act 1 and propelled us into Act 2, plot point 2 wraps up Act 2 and propels us into Act 3. So between the midpoint, so this is why people sometimes have a hard time with Act 2, because you'll notice there's a lot of beats that happen in the first act and there's a lot of beats that happen in the last act. The second act is mostly open, aside from the fact that you need that midpoint. So where people sometimes struggle is just coming up with, well, what do I fill this in with, the moment between the midpoint and plot point 2? And that's going to be up to you as the writer. So what has to happen between those 2 points so logically you can get to plot point 2? So in Jaws, it is that these 3 men take the boat out, they go out to sea, they start, chumming, they start their initial process of trying to find and kill this shark. And what winds up happening by the end of Act 2, so they have found the shark, they shot it, they got the barrels on it, they've tied it to the boat. The shark is much bigger and much stronger than they expected. It's resisting. And long story short, now their boat is sinking because they've tied the shark to the back of the boat, and the shark resisted, did damage to the boat, banged into the side of the boat, in that one scene that's late at night. The boat is now sinking. So that's our plot point 2. So it's going to propel us into Act 3. So now what are all the things that are going to happen in Act 3 as a result of the fact that the boat is sinking and they're in this bad situation? So now in Act 3, our next beat of 3-act structure is the crisis or dilemma beat. So this beat occurs in your script when things are at their very lowest point. So they are the worst that they could possibly be. And sometimes, but not always, this is accompanied by some kind of dilemma, horrible decision, that people have to make. So in Jaws, this is when their boat is sinking, their radio is broken, all hope is lost. So it's definitely the crisis lowest point. But it's also accompanied by a dilemma, which is Matt Hooper, the Matt Hooper character, going to go into the shark cage and, try to get the shark that way. And this is a dilemma because, on one hand, if he doesn't do it, they are out of options. There's nothing else to try. But if he does it, they have already seen the damage that this shark can do, the damage that the shark could do to a boat. It's going to make very light work of that shark cage. So choosing to go in that cage is pretty much, a suicide mission. So this is the crisis dilemma moment. Now, the next moment that comes is the biggest moment in any script, and that's going to be the climax. So the climax in a script has to be the biggest showdown of the entire thing. So throughout the entire screenplay, the entire movie, there has been what is referred to as the major dramatic question. So it's a question that maybe a character asked it outright, or maybe the audience just subconsciously understands what the question is. And in Jaws, that question, of course, is whether or not they are going to be able to defeat this shark. So people have been waiting for the answer to that question. The climax, that biggest moment, it has to be the biggest showdown of the entire thing. And that moment, of course, comes when Chief Brody faces off one-on-one with the shark. The boat is pretty much sunk at that point. He's up on the crow's nest, which is now down all the way down to the level of the water. Final showdown between the two of them. Who's going to win? That is the climax. Now, once you get past that, there is only one beat that remains, and this is very simply the resolution. So the resolution just has to show how this story resolved one way or another. So maybe your hero was victorious, but maybe not. So whatever kind of ending you have, the story just has to resolve in some way. So in Jaws, of course, Matt Hooper resurfaces. Turns out that he was not killed, and he and Chief Brody begin to swim back to shore. So it's resolved. The shark is dead. It is implied, that things are going to be fine from there on out, although we, of course, know there were many sequels that followed, so it wasn't really fine. But for that particular movie, that's the idea. One thing to know about resolutions, that they can be about as long as you want. So sometimes resolutions are very quick. Sometimes a resolution to a story can be as simple as one line. It can be as simple as the two main love interests look at each other and kiss, and that might be it. It just has to convey the resolution. How do things wrap up in the end, so that the audience understands that things have resolved in some way, shape, or form. All right, so that is an awful lot of information for one video. I'm going to quickly recap the points that you need to think of when you're writing your script, and then we're going to talk about how to flesh them out. So number 1, you need sensational opening. Number 2, the inciting incident that is going to bring your hero on the journey. Number 3, unofficial, hopefully by minute 10 or page 10 of the script, people understand at that point what this story is about. Number 4, plot point 1, it's going to catapult us into whatever is going to happen in Act 2. Number 5, the midpoint, occurring right at the midpoint, so about 50% through your script. Number 6, plot point 2, going to cause the action that happens in Act 3. Act 3 then has the crisis moment. So what is that? Our number 7, crisis moment, where things are at the lowest possible point and where very often there is also a dilemma, some kind of choice that has to be made. Number 8, the climax, so the biggest showdown of the entire thing, the moment that is going to answer the dramatic question that audiences have been wondering about since the beginning. And then number 9, the resolution. So how does this story resolve one way or another? Now, I think the easiest way to go about starting your screenplay is just to get these 9 points nailed down. So I recommend just have a sheet of paper, make notes, get those 9 points down, and then reverse engineer. Just start to fill in the gaps when you put together your outline. What has to happen between each one of those points so that they naturally keep moving forward, so that each point makes sense and that the story is fully fleshed out. Something else you can think about is including subplots, which I will talk about a bit more in a video for another day. But again, to get yourself going on this screenplay, thinking about those 9 points and then trying to flesh out what happens between them is the best and easiest way to start. So please, if you enjoyed this, feel free to like and subscribe. Also feel free to leave in the comments down below if you have any questions, and let me know whether or not this screenplay structure works for you and for your story. See you next time.